Hi, this is Travis, friends with Chris, and thankful he showed me selling my wife's brand new car was a good idea. And even better news, she says we can still be friends. But first, check this out.
The question is, I've been saving money. I have some student loans I haven't paid off, maybe some credit card debt. I've got a mortgage and, I've got a kid, maybe another one on the way. One day we'd like to buy a house. My company has a 401k. Some guy at work's talking to me about opening up an IRA. Do I need to save for my kids' college? Am I even on track for any of this? And what should I be doing? And, what's the best next use for the money I've saved or the money I'm saving each month? Help. That's a question that you can't answer unless you really understand the person, their family, their goals. And that level of understanding that you need to get is just something that software is not good at.
Alrighty, everyone. This is the Money Peach Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Peach, and I'm going to be bringing on some of the most amazing people I can find so they can tell you how they do their life and their money the right way. I'm excited to have Chris Hutchins come on the show. That was Chris right there, and as you can tell, he's extremely passionate about helping people with their money. But before we start talking about what Chris is up to now, Chris has a really incredible story about being an entrepreneur at such a very young age. And we're going to talk about finances. What's going on out there? No one's taught how. And the people that aren't taught how are being duped by financial advisors that are charging way too much money, putting them in financial funds that don't make sense, all to make a quick buck. Chris is going to expose that truth. He's going to also talk about what you could be doing with your money. And then, of course, I asked him to put together a special deal for Money Peach listeners. So without further ado, let me bring on my guest, Chris Hutchins. Chris Hutchins, thank you so much for coming on the Money Peach Podcast. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
So I'm going to go ahead and do the actual proper introduction now. It's Chris Hutchins, founder of Grove. And the reason why I wanted to say like this is not going to be a boring episode. This is going to be a fun episode. Chris and I got a lot in common. We were talking right before we hit record, and I'm excited to kind of bring it all out. So, Chris, welcome to the show. And just real quick, give us kind of a little background. When I said Grove, what is Grove?
You could think of Grove like a personal trainer for your money. We're a team of certified financial planners, and we've built software to make the financial planning we do for clients a much more efficient process and therefore much more affordable and accessible to people.
See, I like how you put it. People can relate to that right away. We've had people on the show before that are in the same niche, and they might say, I'm a certified financial planner, and they'll put every letter after their name, and it's kind of like, what does that mean? You just put it plain and simple so we can understand it in what I call English. Is what we need to know. So thank you for that. But before we jump too far into Grove, I brought you on the show because I want to know about you. You have an amazing story, and I think you're going to motivate the crap out of people when they start hearing what you've done at such a young age. Kind of give me a little background. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up outside D.C. in Northern Virginia.
Growing up in D.C., what was like the money mindset in your family? If you could describe your parents or the way you grew up with money, what did that look like?
I was, one of those kids that had an allowance and had to do my chores to get it and had to do other stuff to earn more. So whether that was, as little as like the lemonade stand or kind of always had random small entrepreneurial endeavors, selling T-shirts or things like that. I don't think I strayed too far from the norm, except that, my parents have always been, and my grandparents have always kind of been allegiant to the airline miles kind of game. So a lot of the family travel we did was always free because my dad had earned all these points. And so that was kind of ingrained in me from an early age. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward.
Now, were your parents in the financial industry, or what do they do?
Both of my parents have worked in telecom forever. So finance was just something that, they had some knowledge on, but by no means was that their background or profession.
Okay, so I think we're very similar there as far as my parents were not in the financial space. A lot of people say you have the Money Peach podcast. Were your parents in the financial space? I'm like, absolutely not. They were both entrepreneurs. How did you go then from, growing up in Washington, D.C., the Virginia area, into this entrepreneurship? What was kind of like that path look like?
Yeah, so, both my parents worked for themselves for most of their career. They started a long-distance telecom company. They've, done consulting work. My mom started a meeting planning company. So entrepreneurship definitely ran through the family. My parents, had their home offices at the house as a child. So it seemed very normal to start your own company and kind of do whatever you want as a child. And so, maybe it's no surprise that I ended up down that path. And, when I was trying to figure out where to go to college and what I wanted to study, it was just so obvious. I was like, well, I have to go study business because I want to start a company. And, I don't think I knew what that meant or what I wanted to do, but it just seemed like such the kind of obvious choice that was part of my prioritization when I was figuring out where I wanted to go to school.
So that's really cool, Chris, because I've met so many people. Like, I'll give you an example about myself. So I'm a full-time firefighter. And so it's kind of ironic as my parents are both entrepreneurs, and I went into just the opposite field, a steady job, steady paycheck. Really, I mean, there's risk involved with my career, but not with the actual paycheck coming in. My lifestyle was going to be set up from day one I got hired. And I didn't get this entrepreneurial, well, I guess I always had it, but I didn't act on this entrepreneurial bug until I'd say about 5 years ago. And so, before we hit record on here, I was like, Chris, man, I've been doing all my background research on you, and you are an impressive guy. I mean, you intimidate me. And I look at this going, okay, now this is kind of making sense. I'm 5 years into it, and, you're about 15, 20 years into it, correct?
Yeah, I think I didn't start my first company until, maybe let's call it 7 years ago, but I started lots of projects and did some freelance work, and I basically knew that the entrepreneurial startup world was going to be my calling in about 2008.
Okay, so but prior to 2008, you had some other things that you had started up, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I took some entrepreneurial classes in college. I ran for student body president. I, helped bring back a fraternity. So there were definitely all these kind of like what you would call entrepreneurial endeavors. So I guess it's kind of been there forever. But, there wasn't actually a revenue generating company that you go legally incorporate kind of idea until about 2011.
Okay, so back to 2008 then. You're working in the financial sector?
Yeah, so I'd worked as an investment banker for a little bit, and I started working as a management consultant, and I went to an event in New York called Startup Weekend. And the whole premise of the event was get a bunch of people together and start a company over a weekend. We broke off into groups, and there was kind of 4 or 5 people in each group. And, the idea was to build a product, launch a product, and start it and ship it over the course of, Friday night till Sunday night. And when I left that experience, the goal wasn't to actually, maybe there were a few companies that really came out of it, but it was more about the experience than the end result. And I left thinking, wow, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. And everyone was like, well, then you need to go to San Francisco. That's where this is, building internet companies is all that city's known for. So it was kind of at that point that I was like, oh, okay, that's what I'm going to do professionally. I think, the entrepreneurial endeavors in college were like, yeah, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't really know exactly what that means, and does it make money, and can it replace a job? I hadn't answered those yet, but 2008, I was like, that's it. I got to do that. That's the long-term plan.
Were you laid off then in 2008?
Yeah. So I got the company I was working for to move me to San Francisco, and, it was a financial crisis. And in November 2008, right after I got moved out here, I got laid off.
So you're living in one of the most expensive cities in the United States, and you get laid off.
Yes, that is true. I think at the time I was living, believe it or not, with my now wife in my middle school English teacher's kind of like attic.
Interesting. So, hey, you got to sacrifice. I'm reading your bio here. So tell me about Laid Off Camp then, because this kind of was the spawn of Laid Off Camp, correct?
Yeah. So when you get laid off after the financial crisis, it's like mid-November 2008. I basically accepted that there was no chance I was going to, get another job before the end of the year. Between Thanksgiving, the holidays, around Christmas, like that didn't seem in the cards. And so I was, kind of sitting at home trying to think, okay, well, I've been laid off. What should I do? What is there to do? And, I started looking around online, and all anyone was talking about was layoffs, in the financial crisis. It was just like, man, there's so many people that have been laid off. And then separately, I'd been to this event in the past called Bar Camp. And the idea was get a bunch of technologists together, and we're all just going to talk about interesting things and learn from each other. And it's kind of like you generate the agenda for the conference on the fly. And I was like, wow, what if we applied that to this group of people who are all sitting around thinking, man, how do I generate income? How do I start a company? How do I become a freelancer? How do I get a job? And that was the inspiration for Laid Off Camp. So we did the first one in San Francisco, got really incredible national coverage on the Wall Street Journal, CNN, NPR, and kind of that evolved to doing about 20 events around the country.
So, I feel like that happened really fast. And the question I have is, there's so many people who have ideas, or they want to start movements, or they want to start, something. So you just said you started Laid Off Camp, and all of a sudden you're picked up with the Wall Street Journal. There has to be something in the middle there. I guess my question is how are you moving so quickly on starting something and having it be recognized and noticed? Like even with your company Grove right now, you're a newer company, but yet you've been featured all over the major media outlets. How are you bridging that gap so early in each of these ventures that you're getting into?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it, was serendipity, right? Starting Laid Off Camp, I didn't really know anyone. I remember when the first outlet called to write a story about it, and I actually thought it was like a bunch of friends of mine playing a joke on me. But the timeliness, I certainly, there was a lot more luck than skill there, right? It was the end of 2008. It had a catchy name, and it kind of flew with the, pink slip parties kind of theme that was being talked about in the media a lot. So that one, that's where I kind of learned, okay, getting coverage for things can kind of also be an art. How do you do that? I remember calling all of the TV channels, the local affiliates in San Francisco, the morning of. I'd learned that basically people don't decide where the news trucks go until about 5 a.m. So I called all four, Fox, NBC, ABC, CBS, and then Cron 4, which was the local kind of SF channel. And I called all of them and said, hey, I was just wondering, I don't have anyone from your company on the list. I've got everyone else's. Just want to make sure that I know who from your team's coming so that their name's at the door. And I just did that with each of them and kind of played them all off each other. And then I think they all assumed that someone was coming from each of them. So they all showed up. And so we had coverage on basically every affiliate channel. And then some picked it up for national stuff. So some of it was hacks. Some of it was luck. Some of it was starting to build relationships. The person who wrote the first article in the San Francisco Chronicle, I started to get to know better. I was open to any and all conversations every time.
Interesting. Hey, I like that hack. That's smart. I mean, you have to kind of, hack your way through, especially when you're just coming from the ground up. I think that's brilliant. That's cool. I like that. So then tell me about moving on from Laid Off Camp. And then I see here that you also founded a company called Milk.
Yeah. So it was I'd say probably like a 3-year journey between those two things. But I'd done some freelance work for some of the sponsors of Laid Off Camp. I'd really gotten to understand people in the technology community as I met a lot of people in San Francisco. I'd spoken at a conference called South by Southwest about, how to turn unemployment into something interesting. And at first I decided I'm just going to get a job at what I thought was the hottest startup at the time. I identified a company called Simple Geo, which had great investors, was running on the theme of location-based services, which was really hot because the iPhone had just gotten GPS. And so I joined that company. From there, I got to know a ton of people who had all worked at a company called Dig before. Not all of them, but a large group of them. And so about a year later, the founder of Dig was asking around his network and said, hey, I want to start this company. Does anyone know someone that's just kind of an all-around jack of all trades, wear lots of hats kind of guy or girl that could help me out? And, he got introduced to me and he was like, hey, do you want to leave and start Milk? I got this idea and, I just need someone who can kind of run with everything. He had been quite successful at Dig on the cover of lots of, magazines. And I thought, what a great opportunity to work with, a really incredible, smart founder who's had so much success before. Why not? So we started Milk together with a few other people and we were kind of off to the races. And that was kind of my first, let's go legally incorporate. We're going to fundraise. We're going to, have to pay salaries and all that kind of stuff.
So what is Milk then?
The idea behind Milk was that, lots of startups come up with an idea and it doesn't always work out. So instead of committing to the idea up front, we're going to be like a startup studio. We'll come up with an idea. We'll try it. If it works, we'll run with it. If it doesn't, we'll come up with another one. And that was kind of the inspiration. So we had one app at the beginning called Oink. The idea was that you could rate the things at places. So it wasn't just, this is the best restaurant, but the burger at this restaurant's incredible. So we built that out. We shipped it. We launched it. We had about 100,000 users. It was going pretty well. Obviously, a lot more burden on users to put data in because it's not just the restaurant's great. It's let me add what I ate for an appetizer. Let me add what I ate for an entree. Let me add the drink I got. And so, instead of the 80-20 rule, it was like the 95-5 rule where only 5% of people were adding content. So, we were kind of trucking along. It was working well, but there was an opportunity to kind of move the team and kind of essentially get acquired by Google. And so, it was kind of an offer that we couldn't not take up. So did that. And, about a year in, we were all moving over to Google and, some of us went to Google and some didn't, but that's kind of where we ended up.
So when Google acquired Milk, you went over to Google Ventures then?
So I started out on Google as a product manager working on Google Plus. And, Google's a huge company and they're incredibly supportive internally about helping people find the right home. And so, I think we tried the product management side within Google Plus and I don't think it was the right alignment of roles and responsibilities, but the Google Ventures team was looking for someone similar to me and my co-founder. And so we both ended up over there about 3 or 4 months later.
Very cool. So what were you doing then for Google Ventures?
Google Ventures was a few years old. Now it seems like they've been around forever, but at the time it was kind of a newer fund. And, my MO was to go do early stage deals. It was to find startups to invest, anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000 into and kind of help get them to the next stage. Probably did that 20, 30, 40 times over my time there. And that was really my mandate and focus on early stage investing. And that's what we did.
Do you have anything that we would recognize as far as listeners that you guys maybe started up or helped start up?
I mean, Google Ventures, was incredibly successful, has had, tons of recognizable brands, Nest, Uber, things like that. Neither of those were my particular deals. I think the last deal I did before I left was a company called ClassPass, which people might know. But, a lot of the deals I worked on, were 2 years ago, and there were a handful of people focused on some, really interesting problems, but way less consumer. So there's a couple companies that were working on background checks and data infrastructure for schools, but not really consumer facing brands.
Wow. So before we move on to what you're up to now with Grove, just tell the listeners, how old are you?
I'm 33.
And I think that's just impressive. I mean, it's incredible that we just went through a pretty incredible timeline of you doing some high level things, and you're now 33. If you talk to a lot of people out there, you would expect someone that's had this much experience and, these many things they've done throughout their early career, they'd be, 40, 50 years old. And here you're 33 years old. You've accomplished so much. Why do you think you are able to accomplish so much and be on the ground moving right away? What do you credit that to?
I think early on, I knew that I didn't know everything. So, I remember in college, I got a job offer at a management consulting firm, and then I got another job offer at an investment bank. And the management consulting firm, I was late to this whole process because I didn't realize how early in your senior year you're supposed to get a job. So they couldn't start me until 10 months after graduation. And so I just accepted both jobs and thought, look, I'll start one. And if 10 months in, I don't like it, I have this other job I can go take. That was one. As soon as I decided that San Francisco and working in tech would be like the thing I did, the first thing I did was I went to my boss and said, hey, can I transfer to San Francisco? So, I kind of just didn't wait. So, I hear a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to put in my 3 or 4 years before I do the next thing. And I think my mentality has always been, oh, I want to do that thing. Well, let's go do that thing. I haven't waited for permission or some kind of timing. Some of it has been luck, right? Like company got acquired. First company I joined, Simple Geo, ended up not doing particularly well. And so it's kind of like, oh, I need to figure out what's next. I got laid off. Some of them were out of my control and some of them weren't. But, I've kind of never waited for someone to give me permission to do anything.
It's funny you say luck. I have this belief that there's two different types of luck. There's opportunity luck and detrimental luck. So if you put yourself in bad positions over and over again, you have bad luck. It just happens. And then you hear those people say, man, why does this always happen to me? And it's like, well, you always put yourself in these positions to have bad luck. The opposite is also true. If you continually put yourself in good positions, take on opportunities, eventually you're going to, hit luck. But it's not just luck that comes out of nowhere. It's not like winning the lottery type luck. It's opportunity luck. You put yourself in position over and over and over again, and good things happen. I could attest to that as well. I mean, there's been times where, I look back going, how in the world is a firefighter being interviewed on television about helping millennials with their money? Like, it doesn't even make sense. But once you put yourself in positions over and over and over again, this luck, as you have it, will come in. I want people to have that takeaway is, when you see these people out there and you're like, man, they're so lucky. And it's like, well, peel back the layers a little bit and look at all the positions they put themselves in, all the work they did, taking, 2 jobs if they had to, maybe 3 jobs if they had to, whatever it took. And now look what they're at. And you might call it luck, but there's opportunity luck involved. So the next thing I want to ask you, Chris, is let's talk about Grove, because I think this is cool.
Yeah, me too.
Well, you better, right? So tell me, how did you get the idea to start with Grove? Was it, for our story, when we started our business, it kind of came out as we had a major problem with money in 2011. We overcame it. And then, over time, people started asking us, like, what did you do to get out of debt? And that turned into our business. So it was never like we sat down 10 years ago and said, here's this business plan. We're going to start this. It was kind of like a calling. Like people had said, hey, we're struggling with finances. We're struggling with our money. We don't know how to do a budget. We have too much debt. What the heck do we do? And we just started showing people, and that turned into where we're here today. How did you get started with Grove?
I've kind of always been, a life hacker or an optimizer, like an incredibly frugal person. And, some of that I probably get from my grandparents or my parents. And so, naturally in my friend group, everyone's always been like, oh, there's Chris, that, got laid off and, backpacked around the world for 8 months, but didn't spend any money doing it, or has, traveled here and, did it all on points, or was able to find a way to buy a house, or it was always like, wow, you've been able to figure all this out, yet we all know you as this really incredibly frugal person. Their feedback was like, I want to do that. So, on one hand, I had a bunch of people that were constantly asking me for advice. And then when I was leaving Google Ventures to figure out what to work on next, I just started talking to people about problems in their lives. I tend to think that the best companies solve really big problems for people. And everyone kept telling me, like, I have no idea what I'm doing financially. And as I dug in deeper and deeper and deeper, what I understood was there just isn't, a financial advisor that makes sense for most people. If you break advisors into 3 camps, there's the advisors who, are totally free, but make all their money selling you expensive life insurance and mutual funds you don't need. That's not good. Steer clear of them. There's the advisors who, will act in your best interest, but have, $1 million and up minimum and charge about 1% of your investments. And that's not bad, but it's really expensive and you need $1 million. Most people that need financial advice the most don't have $1 million yet. And then there's, an independent group of a bunch of certified financial planners, and they're always acting in your best interest, which I originally thought was just what financial advisors do. But it turns out, 9 in 10 financial advisors are brokers, and in that capacity have no legal obligation to act in their client's best interest. So I realized, okay, wow, there's this group of people that are acting in their client's best interest. They don't care how much money they have as long as they can afford to pay their fee. But the average cost to work with a financial planner is over $2,500 a year. And so if you look at spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year to work with someone, that's great if you can afford it. But if not, what happens? And I just kept thinking, why does it have to cost so much? Like, why are all these people I know dying to use this service, but not because it's too expensive? And as we look deeper, the way an advisor today spends their day or a CFP is so much caught up in bad technology, old standards, in-person meetings, things that, our parents wanted, but, are not that important to us. And if you rebuilt that model and that service around today's generation and built a lot of technology to make the process efficient, you could save advisors tons and tons of time and then pass all that savings on to the client in terms of, a lower cost. So we charge a fraction of the price that, a traditional advisor charges.
Hey guys, I just wanted to pause and take a second to say thank you from me to you for listening to and supporting the Money Peach podcast. Without listeners like you, this show definitely would not be possible, so thank you. The number one question that I receive is this: Peach, I just don't know where to start when it comes to my money. So many of us out there are living paycheck to paycheck. We have tons of debt. We're not making any headway. We can't save any money. We want to go on a freaking vacation where we pay cash for it. Oh, and let's talk about retirement savings and kids' college planning on top of that, right? Where do you start? Well, that's why we created the cash flow formula. The cash flow formula is the same system that Andrea and I used to pay off $52,000 in debt in only 7 months. And the best part is it's 100% free, meaning we are going to send you the free tools and a free lesson on how to set up your own cash flow formula. So to get started, go over to getcashflowformula.com. That's GET cashflowformula.com. Once again, head on over to getcashflowformula.com to get your free copy and your free lesson on how to get started the right way. All right, guys, now back to the show.
It's funny you were talking about the archaic way that people are doing stuff. So I was talking with a financial advisor just last week. They have a pretty successful firm, but most of their clients that they service are age 60 and older. They don't have anybody in the younger space. It's all, I guess they would be considered like an old school traditional financial planning practice. So he was telling me, he's like, we're scared to death because we have not jumped on what he called the bandwagon of, let's be way more efficient. We're doing things the old way, the way we've always done them. People are not jumping on board anymore. They're going to places like Grove where people are starting to ask, where's my money going? As your money grows, this is a lot of money. And then on top of that, we had a guy in the podcast here, and he said one of the biggest things that bothered him about the financial industry is we only take care of rich people. Like you said, you have to have a net worth of, $1 million before you get a seat at the table to get help with your money. Why aren't we helping the people that don't have money?
Yeah, traditionally the problem is it takes time to help people, and time costs money, and people without money can't afford it. But what technology has been able to do. If you look 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who had cell phones? Well, cell phones are really expensive. Plans are really expensive. And then technology's gotten to the point that, I don't really know anyone that doesn't have a cell phone. And the same thing happened with computers. And the same thing happened with lots of services. Personal trainers used to be, something that only really, really wealthy people had. And now there are apps that let you use a personal trainer remotely and log all of your information. And so technology's kind of really enabled all of these services to be efficient enough that people can use them. And big financial institutions just happen to be really, really slow to build and adopt technology, and even slower to transition to new business models that might kind of totally cannibalize their existing business.
The way I've kind of seen it happening over the last couple of years, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is you have, I would say stage one is your traditional financial advisor. You go sit down in their office, they bring you a cup of coffee and they talk way over your head. They crunch the numbers, then you leave and you're like, what just happened, right? That would be like one vertical. Another one that I'm starting to see that's happening is you have the 100% online advisor. So it's actually not even a person. It's all robotic and it's doing it for you. Very, very low cost because obviously there's no people involved, or very few people involved. And then you have like kind of the mixture where you're going to have a financial advisor that you could talk with virtually or even in person if you live nearby, but there's also going to be the technology aspect of it too. So the reason why I bring these three up when I kind of break them down is, where would you say Grove falls?
We're definitely the third, kind of the hybrid model. I think what we've learned is technology is really good at solving some problems. And so if you know that you have $35,000 and you want to invest it for the next 35 years, and you don't have any better way to put that money to use, whether that's, a taxable account or a tax-free account, or like your 401k or a 529 to save for your kids' education. And you just know that the best solution is a brokerage account. And there are online services that are, robo-advisors that you can go and say, here's my $35,000, invest it for 35 years. And that's great. But one of the things technology is not good at is really personally understanding you. So the question we find clients actually have, or people actually have, isn't, I have $35,000 and I've already decided exactly what I need to do with it. Can you just execute it? The question is, I've been saving money. I have some student loans I haven't paid off, maybe some credit card debt. I've got a mortgage and, I've got a kid, maybe another one on the way. One day we'd like to buy a house. My company has a 401k. Some guy at work's talking to me about opening up an IRA. Do I need to save for my kids' college? Am I even on track for any of this? And what should I be doing? What's the best next use for the money I've saved or the money I'm saving each month? Help. That's a question that you can't answer unless you really understand the person, their family, their goals. And that level of understanding that you need to get is just something that software is not good at.
The human has to still be involved.
Yeah, so we believe strongly that the human has to be a part of understanding clients, because if you don't understand the complete picture, then, the advice doesn't work. I might be able to tell you, without understanding the complete picture, the best way to invest $35,000 for 35 years. But if I don't have the complete picture, I might not know that your company offers a 401k and they match. If you were to be putting that money to work by investing in your 401k, you might be way better off. But if I don't have the complete picture, I can't tell you that. Or I can't tell you that you're better off, paying off your credit cards or paying down your student loans or any of those things. So only if I learn all of those things am I able to really give you the best advice. And so we believe that you have to have a human as part of the equation to do that.
Cookie cutter finance does not work for great results. And so we all know who they are. There are some big time financial gurus that are on the radio and, they're speaking to 5 to 7 million people every single day at a time, and they have to give cookie cutter advice. And so the thing I like about Grove and the thing I like about this whole niche that you guys have created is it takes the best of both worlds. You can service a lot of people. You can help them quickly, but you can also give them the human experience where, the guy in San Francisco, his life's a little bit different than the farmer in Kansas. It's just the way it is. And the way
Totally.
You can't cookie cutter those two families. You're going to have completely different results if you do that. Yeah.
And I would say earlier in your career, when you have less money, the nuance of the advice I would give to someone is much different. So, when you're first getting started, it's like pay off really expensive debt and put aside some money and make sure that you've got, at least 1, maybe 3 to 6 months of emergency funds. Like, that's great. But then all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I'm getting engaged or getting married or having kids or buying a home. I've got this new job and I've got open enrollment coming up, and life gets really complicated. And then you've also saved money and you're like, what do I do with my savings? What do I do with the money I save each month? And, when life gets really complicated, it gets harder. So, I would argue that earlier in your career, when you're younger, when you're just starting saving, the cookie cutter advice might work a little better. But at some point, there just becomes so many moving parts that if the person giving you advice doesn't really understand everything, it's really hard to believe that that advice is really best for you.
So let's just say in a nutshell, early on, cookie cutter works. As you start to build a little bit of wealth or you move in age, cookie cutter is crap. Let's just make it as simple as possible.
I'll let you say that. I don't, that's fine.
Perfect. All right. So, Chris, the next question I have then is if someone is listening right now and they want to go to the next step with Grove, what does it look like for them? How do they get started?
So I set up hellogrove.com/moneypeach. If you head over there, you can schedule an intro session with one of our advisors and kind of get to understand who the product's good for, some nuances about the pricing, the availability, all that. You get to walk through a demo of the product. So I think that's the best first step and go from there.
Very, very cool. So I'm on your site right now, and it's so true. I mean, if you're going to get a financial plan, it's upwards of $2,500, kind of at the low end, all the way up to about $5,000 is kind of what I see. And I'll be honest with you, I think that's still worth it. I think that if you're going to create a financial plan that's going to last you a lifetime and help you, change the corner, I think you're going to look back in time and say, I spent $5,000, but look at my net worth has grown since that moment. It was worth it. To justify $2,500 to $5,000, I think is okay for a real financial plan. But you guys are a lot less expensive. What's kind of the price range, just to give us a ballpark?
Yeah, so it's not even a range. We just charge $600 a year. And I think what's interesting is over the last 10, 15 years, we've all taken on a bit more responsibility for our money. It's not like there's a pension set up for everyone. We don't just have the same job for 30 years. And so we've seen our clients treat financial planning as a really evolutionary process. You know that maybe in a couple of years you want to buy a house. As it gets closer, you know exactly how much house. You know where the real estate prices have gone. You know whether you want to stay where you're living or somewhere else. You think, I want to have kids someday, but then you know exactly how many. And then you start thinking about their education. And so $2,500 is for a financial plan. If it's the only plan you ever need, makes sense, except that life is changing all the time. And so if it costs $2,500 to get a financial plan and life changes every 6 to 9 months or 12 months or 18 months or whatever it is, that starts to really stack up. So we think that by using technology, you can make that entire process really efficient, and we can have kind of an evolutionary version of financial planning where every year, like you would a physical with your doctor, you do an annual checkup with your advisor, and we make sure that what's changed, let's understand, let's make sure we're replanning and updating things to be in line with, all the latest information about your family, your life, and your money.
Absolutely. I love it. So we're just finishing up here. It's hellogrove.com/moneypeach. If you don't have a pen and paper, don't worry. We are going to put links in the show notes. They will be there. So at the end of the show, Chris, I always ask our guests 1 or 2 questions. And so the first one I'm going to hit you with is books. I'm a reader. I love reading. I love hearing what other people are reading. If you could only give away one book for the rest of your life, what would it be and why?
Yeah, this is such a tough one because there are 2 books that I've bought like 15 different times. God, it's really tough because it's like, there are 2 books and I always keep extra copies to give to people. So to narrow it down to one.
Well, now you're going to have to give us both of them because someone's going to email me and say, what was the second one? He didn't say it. So go ahead and just say what they both are.
One of them is a book called Vagabonding by Rolf Potts. It's, an incredible book about travel. I've probably read it 4 times. I read it before I took a trip around the world. I read it, all the time, and I give it to anyone who's thinking about traveling. It's amazing. The other one really on point with the theme here is called Happy Money. It's a quick, short read that I recommend to everyone. It really just dives into the psychology of money and how to optimize the way you use money in your life to really promote and focus on happiness. Things like, they kind of have 5 rules of things you could spend money on to be happy, and no surprise, buying, $1,000 shoes and handbags don't actually make people happier.
So Happy Money and Vagabonding.
Yep. Those would be my 2.
Very cool. How has Happy Money helped you in your life?
My wife and I were just talking about this. One of the things they talk about is prepaying for things. So the general idea that once you've booked something, let's call it a vacation, right? You could go on the vacation, and then when you leave, you got to pay the bill, and all of a sudden you look at the bill and you're like, oh man, that was so expensive. Versus you pay for it once up front, cost is gone, and now every moment up until the trip, during the trip, and after the trip, you don't have to think about the money aspect of it. You just enjoy the trip and you get the best experience. So my wife and I try as hard as we can every time we travel, like pay up front or use miles or use points or prepay the room so that everything from the moment we've booked onwards there's just no thinking about the cost, and you get to enjoy the trip to its fullest.
I like that. That's cool. All right. I'm going to start doing that. I like that. Hey, last question I have for you, Chris, is what is on the home screen of your phone? If you look at your phone right now, what do you have on the home screen?
So many apps, all in folders with icons of emojis.
What picture?
What background picture?
Yes.
Oh, a blank solid black.
Easy. All right, Chris. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was great. Head on over to hellogrove.com/moneypeach. hellogrove.com/moneypeach. We'll have links in the show notes to this. Chris, really appreciate what you're doing out there. You know, you're providing a service that's helping people get better. And I think that's extremely noble of you. And you're an entrepreneur. My hat goes off to anybody who's an entrepreneur, because one thing that I have learned is it is one of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life, but it's also one of the most rewarding. So whenever I get to talk to another fellow entrepreneur, hats off to you. I have the utmost respect for you. I think you're amazing. It's pretty incredible that you've done this much at 33 years of age. Pretty impressive, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm fighting the metaphorical fire every day, and you're fighting the real fire. So, hats off to you.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, we'll be in touch, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you. Great being here.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, links, anything that Chris and I talked about can be found over at moneypeach.com/session101. That's moneypeach.com/session101. Special thanks goes out to my producer, Steve Stewart, and my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. Stay tuned next week, where I'm bringing on an expert in terms of getting out of a timeshare. He is an expert in timeshare exit strategies. His name's Gordon Newton. He's going to come on and tell us exactly how to get started, what to do, but more importantly, how to beware of the scams out there so you don't get ripped off.
Two most common overused pieces of marketing in the timeshare exit industry have become, we have 100% money back guarantee, we get you out of your money back. But people wouldn't know. They think that sounds good. Hey, they got 100% money back guarantee. I've got nothing to lose. What they don't tell you is that these timeshare exit agreements, just like your timeshare, they go on into perpetuity as well. There is no end date. So if they continue to work your file until the timeshare's out of your name, you're still financially on the hook for your timeshare. In some cases, these can go 2 or 3 years or more. I've seen it. It happens all the time.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week, and God bless. Boom,